fuck? Back hard on me. Melted. I need nades back there. I need nades. There's one on me. Don't shoot him though. Don't shoot him. Don't shoot him. Let me keep only one of them. Goodbye. Kinda. Shield one on me. He's done for, buddy. You crazy? We're melty, kid. We got this. Alright, we got him. Let's get it. Alright. What's goody, all my Division bros? It's your boy Reckless OP coming to you live with another build video. I hope you guys are enjoying the channel. If you are, leave a like and a subscribe will be appreciated as we're trying to grow. Anyways, let's get back to the build. This build, we're going to start off with the signature weapon. The signature weapon we're using is Firewall. We're using Firewall for the med kit and how tanky it's going to make us because we're running a DPS build because this is a SMG build. Your armor kit recovers 200% armor and 200% health over 10 seconds. This is the reason we're using the Firewall, just to get a little bit tanky. As everybody knows, Firewall is meta right now. So let's get into the build. The focus of this build is going to be the apartment. We're focusing on the apartment and SMGs on this build, guys. This is why this build is called the House 2.0, because the apartment is the only weapon in the game that resembles the house. So we're going to be using the house for perfectly measured. The top half of the magazine has 20% rate of fire and 27% weapon damage. The bottom half of the magazine has 20% rate of fire and 33 total weapon damage. The bottom half is where we're getting all our damage from. That's the one that's going to be hitting the hardest. So we're focusing on stacking crit chance and crit damage on this build so we can hit the hardest with the apartment. We're also using the Lady Death, guys. Why? Because when we're using the Lady Death, it makes us move faster, it gives us speed, it gives us damage, it gives us the best of both worlds. So we're using it because when moving, gain 4 stacks per second or 8 stacks if sprinting, up to 40 stacks total. Each round fired consumes a stack amplifying damage by 60%. Kills grant 20% movement speed for 10 seconds. Guys, that buff is godly. That 20% movement speed, you're just moving through squads. You're able to DPS, take out squads. This is a godly weapon. This is the synergy that we're using. We're also using the Coyote's mask, guys. We're using the Coyote's mask for the first buff, the 0 to 15 meters, 25% critical hit damage. Why? Because we're stacking critical hit damage on every piece, guys. So that's going to take our damage that's at 157%. That's going to take it to almost 200%, because calculate that, it's 25% of this. So it's almost 180% critical hit damage, you could say. Plus, we almost have maxed out crit chance. So we're getting that buff regardless with the Coyote's mask. That's why we're using the mask. Now, let's get into the talents, guys. The talents we're using Unbreakable. When your armor is depleted, repair 95% of your armor. We're using Unbreakable just to feel a little bit more tanky against those guys that are stacking a lot of armor, because in the DZ, people are stacking a lot of armor. So that's why we're using Unbreakable. For my PvP talent, I'm using Companion. While you are within 5 meters of an ally or skill, total weapon damage is increased by 15%. This build is a build that I use while I'm with a squad. This build is not good for solo play because you're so squishy, but you could use it in solo play. I see a lot of guys running around with it, but in my opinion, I like to use this build in a squad. Why? Because when I'm playing with a squad, I'll let players focus, the tankier players, and then I'll sneak around. Like, for example, I use this build as a ninja build, sneaking around and coming up behind players and just putting out that DPS and being the DPS in the players while they're focusing the tanks. So this is the perfect ninja build, you could say, that I try to use, because that's the way you got to play this, because you're very squishy. You understand? You could get killed very easily. Even by a tank that doesn't have damage, you can get killed very easily because we're not stacking any blues. So that's the reason why I'm using Companion in PvP, so that I can output more damage. And we're using Unbreakable just for that little bit more tankiness. And that's, we're stacking the Companion. We're using it with the Defender drone. So when I proc my Defender drone, I'm getting that 15% extra weapon damage. So that's why we're using that as a talent. Also, guys, let's get into the pieces. We're using 2 Sokolov Concern. We're using 2 Sokolov Concern. We're using it for the SMG damage and the crit damage, because you got to remember, guys, that's what we're stacking. We're using Providence for the headshot damage, because we're also stacking headshot damage in this build, guys, because this SMGs is very easy to hit your headshots. So we're using 2 Sokolov, 1 Providence. We're using 1 Grupo Sombra for the crit damage, and we're using 1 Seska Viroba for the crit chance. So this is the focus of this build. Every piece we're stacking crit hit chance and crit hit damage. The only reason I have armor regen here is because I haven't gotten a good roll. The best in slot for this would either be headshot damage or more crit chance if you're missing it, which I'm not on this build because I'm trying to stack crit damage on every slot of my mod slots. Right here I'll have 10% status effects, but the best in slot will be that 12% crit damage that I'm missing to take me to almost 170% crit damage, as you can see, because if I get that 12%, I will be at 169.7, you could say, or 169.3, and that would be perfect, because then I would be at 200% crit damage with the synergy of my Coyote's mask if I just get this one piece. But as you can see, my Seska Voba is God roll. This is the piece we're looking for, but just this piece on that. If we were to get these rolls on this piece would be God roll. But this is what we have for now. But just remember, guys, you got to stack crit damage on every piece so you could get the max amount. So you could just have your SMG as melty as possible. So also, what are we using? In the skills, we're using the drone. The Defender drone, we're using it for the Companion. We're using the Defender drone for the Companion. We're using the Booster Hive just to give us that extra buff of weapon damage to the squad. So the Booster Hive has been revamped. So the Booster Hive delivers a stimulant to nearby allies that increases their weapon damage and handling. I have a couple mods here that I'm using on it. Let me show you. I'm using a stim efficiency mod. As you can see, the stim efficiency mod increases the buff amount. If I was to take it off, the buff amount would only be 10%, but it increases it by 8.9%. So that's a good mod, and I'm using stem charges, which also gives me more charges for the Booster Hive. I'm using a duration mod, and on my skill, my Defender Hive, I'm using a duration mod, I'm using the scan range, and I'm using armor repair just to make us feel a little bit more tanky, guys, because that's what we're trying to go for. But the main focus of this build is like what I said. You got to have high crit chance and high crit damage because you're using the SMG, guys. You want to be able to melt. Right now, these stats are looking beautiful. I have 59.5 on my apartment. I have 157% crit damage, but you got to also remember I'm getting 25% from my mask, so that's an extra 35 crit damage. So it means that my crit damage right now is actually 190% crit damage, which that's melty, guys. As you can see in the clips how melty I was. I also taken focus on this headshot damage, guys. That's why I said if you ever get the piece for your chest piece, it'll be dope to stack more headshot damage since we're already using the Providence for headshot and since we have headshot damage on the backpack. But as you can see, the focus of this build is stacking crit chance and crit damage, guys. If you get that on every piece, you'll be melty as possible. And guys, the apartment, it feels very beautiful. I know there's other options you can use. You could use these vectors. These vectors are beautiful also. But I really like the apartment, how it feels and the damage output. And I'm really liking the synergy with the Lady Death and how fast it makes me. In PvE, what I focus, you're going to see the clips at the end of the video, is this backpack. This backpack is beautiful for PvE. For PvE, if you're going to use anything, use Bloodsucker. With a SMG, you really feel how tanky it makes you in PvE. You could use this for heroics if you're in a squad. You could be the DPS. If you like to get up close and tank out NPCs, this will be dope for you. You're gonna see how it stacks in the end footage and how I get almost 50% bonus armor just from using that Bloodsucker. But if I'm not using Bloodsucker, if I'm not doing PvE content, if I'm in PvP, I'm gonna use Companion and just get that extra weapon damage because that 10% blood from Bloodsucker is gonna be pointless because I don't really have that much armor. But this is the build, guys. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you guys are enjoying the channel. If you can, guys, we're trying to grow the channel. Leave a like and a subscribe would be greatly appreciated. You already know it's your boy Reckless OP signing out. Let's get it.